Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today we have special guest Hunter Leininger to come on the show and share his view on life, share his view on some amazing, well, I'm not even some, like a million amazing adventures that he started at a very young age. I'm going to read a quick bio and then I'm going to give you some sneak peeks into what this podcast was like. It was exceptional. So Hunter's an endurance sports athlete. He's an ultrarunner, mountaineer, mountain biker, content creator, and reality TV star. The eager son of an endurance athlete, Hunter set his first world record by becoming the youngest finisher of a 24-hour national championship at age 11, and has since set records in FKTs in expedition racing, adventure racing, mountain biking, endurance races, and ultra running. Recently, he summited the highest peaks of each state in 42 days and just became the fastest to ever run across Florida in 63 hours, 52 minutes. A record that was once held by David Goggins, which I find a little funny because in this conversation, you'll find out that David Goggins and Hunter probably share some commonalities, especially when it comes to their mental fortitude. Hunter has an incredible rap sheet of just all of the races that he's been doing, starting at age 7. His first adventure race was at age 7 and going on. He's only 22 and he's accomplished so much. But what I think you'll find in this podcast is it's not really about the accomplishments that he's done. It's about what else you can learn from Hunter. His view on life and his approach to things is a breath of fresh air, I guess you could say, and it's really inspiring. And I think that you'll all be able to learn some things from this interview. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and roll this podcast. I know you guys will really enjoy it, and I know you'll be able to take some amazing things out of it. Hunter, I'm excited to have you on the podcast, and I'm actually, I would say, overwhelmed of where to even begin this conversation because I got this sheet here, which if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. This is like size 1 font, and it's just all of the things that you've done so far in your, I don't know if you're still 20, but 20 up to 20 years of life on this sheet. And it's overwhelming, but it's also just so cool and so wild. So I guess I want to dive into, I guess a good starting point is just the beginning, right? So you started to do some of these adventure races at 7 years old. I'm going to guess that at that point you're probably influenced by watching some people around you doing these, right? I think it was your dad, if I'm correct in just kind of your background. But as far as you remember, like what was it like to get started in these? What was your drive? What were you really hoping to do when you're 7 years old and entering in an adventure race?
Yeah, so so great to talk to you, and I'm a big fan of the company and everything. But yeah, the list is funny. That only ended at 20 years old. I haven't updated to the past 2 years of like, God, the amount of things we've jammed in the past 2 years is just insane. But super grateful. Again, I started adventure racing when I was 7 years old. So it's been 15 years of doing all these adventures. So when I was 7 years old, basically my dad used to do these adventure races, which adventure races are running, biking, canoeing races that are all off-road. There's no marked course. You basically get a map and a compass at the start of the race, and you've got to make up your own course. And at the time, when I was 6 years old, I asked him, "Hey, Dad, can I do one of these races with you?" And he was like, "Absolutely no." They're like, no kids are allowed to do these races. Like, it's unheard of for kids to do endurance races. It's too dangerous. You'll get dirty. You'll get injured, all this stuff. So after a year of begging him, he eventually was like, "All right, I'll let you do a race with me just to shut you up." And I eventually got into the race, and we had to go through all these loopholes of like convincing the race director that this was safe. My dad was going to take care of me, sign insurance policies, all this complicated stuff. But finally got to the start line at 7 years old. And from that moment on, it was like, I did that race with my dad. And it was mainly, I just wanted to spend time with my dad. And it was like, adventure racing gave that to me. Whereas like, I used to play football and my dad was always on the sidelines cheering me on. But adventure racing gave me the opportunity for him to be in the game with me. And we were playing together. So from that 6-hour race, I basically just fell in love with the sport, fell into mud up to my waist, lost my shoe, found a bone, saw some wired pigs, like so many cool experiences at 7 years old that I was like, I was hooked for life. From that moment on, I was like, every single year I would just do a longer and longer adventure race. And now 15 years later, I'm still that little kid that's stuck in the mud up to my neck now.
No, that's awesome that you've been able to, I guess, bond with your dad over that and share those experiences. I think everyone looks for opportunities like that. And it's cool that you were able to find that, it's 7 years old, and to just be all in on something like that. I'm curious. I mean, my mind went to like, did you start like training for these, or I guess I don't know. So in the ultra endurance world, right, there is a whole gamut of things that you can do for training, nutrition, hydration, all of these things. But at this age, like, are you aware of any of that, or like, what are you doing, I guess?
No, it was honestly for the first like 5 to 10 years, it was just get out in the woods and have fun. And it wasn't like I was doing these races, I'm trying to beat everybody here. Like, I was the only kid. The average age was 40, 50-year-olds in here. And I'm 7 years old running along with my dad. It was never about like, oh, let's try to push ourselves and win this race. It was like, let's just go have fun. And the cool thing about adventure racing is the course is truly up to you. You don't have to go get all the checkpoints. You can kind of design your own course. You get your map and compass and you're like, oh, that section's too far. I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to go do these. I'm really good at biking, so I'm going to bike a lot. I'm going to skip the paddle. So you can choose your own adventure. So there was no pressure of like, you have to perform at the top level for those first few years. It was just, again, just go out with my dad. And our motivation at the beginning was like, no kids were doing this. Like the second youngest of these races were like in their late 20s. So it was like, for me to be 7, it was all about like, okay, we're inspiring some people. Like, man, people are seeing this little kid doing these races alongside, and that's really cool. So it's like, we got on this mission of like trying to inspire more people. So it was always about doing the next longest race ever. So it went from a 6-hour race to a 10-hour to a 24-hour national championships to a 5-day race to the world championships, all these different things, try to break these records for the youngest person ever do these races. And we set multiple world records in the process, but it wasn't like we were trying to kill ourselves and push really hard. It was really just what came fun to us. And as soon as it stopped being fun, we're like, okay, let's try something else. So, yeah.
So is that why, like, going back to just the concept of an adventure race? So if it's a 6-hour race, you just continue to do everything for 6 hours. The end is the end. Like, there's not like you have to, like you say, hit every checkpoint and do every possible thing that they've got there. You're just saying, all right, how many things can I check off a list essentially in the 6 hours?
Yeah, so basically you get the map at the beginning, and there's, for a 6-hour race, let's just guess there's 20 checkpoints. And checkpoints are these orienteering flags that they hang up in the woods, and they're hidden on the map. So it's not like on a road. It's like you're running along a road and you have to go 100 meters into the woods, into the swamp, and find this checkpoint. So there's 20 of those hidden Easter eggs around this map. And you basically choose whatever Easter eggs you want to go get. And at the end of the 6 hours, whatever team gets the most Easter eggs wins the race. So we were coming there and getting like 10 Easter eggs and like finishing back of the pack, middle of the pack. It didn't really matter. Where other teams were going all out for 6 hours and getting them all. So that's kind of how adventure racing's explained.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's much of it, or I haven't, I guess, been exposed to the world of adventure racing, but that sounds like a pretty good time. And it sounds like it's a pretty fun time as a group too. So that sounds super interesting. So you continue to do these races, as you're getting older and older, you start to really, I mean, like at 12 years old, I think I'm seeing like 8 different types of races that you did, or events, I guess, that you did that year. And it just kind of goes up from there. So talk to me about like the progression for you, right? Like, what was the progression for you? What was the why for you to move on from adventure racing or try new things?
Yeah. So for, I guess, like 13 years, I only did adventure racing. So basically up until I was like, I would say 19, I just did adventure racing. I did mountain bike racing, endurance races and stuff, but it was mostly adventure racing. That was what I loved. And that was where I felt like I could make the biggest impact. And I had the most fun in that. But the impact part, I was like, again, I was told ever since I was 7 years old that kids are not supposed to do this. This is impossible for a 7-year-old or a 12-year-old to race across the entire state of Florida. So it was always like trying to prove to myself. And at the time it was proving to other people that like this was possible to a kid to do these crazy things. And just because you have a dream doesn't mean you need to push it off 10 years down the road. If you want to run 100 miles, find out how to do it now and just go do it. Don't wait until you're 40 years old to do it. So that was kind of my driving force of keep doing these long adventures. And again, it was big motivation was just being with my dad. It was one of the only sports that I could race with my dad and have fun. And like adventure racing is a team sport. So you could be a 2-person team, a 3-person team, or 4-person team. So you can race with your family, you can race with friends, you can all come together. And that was really unique for me to just spend that time with my dad and bond. We did so many different adventures, traveled to most of the states and across the world and all these really cool experiences was just because I wanted to spend time with my dad. And then when I did the Eco Challenge, which I don't know if you're familiar with Eco Challenge.
Just a little bit, but let's have you kind of give an overview for people that aren't.
So the Eco Challenge is the toughest adventure race there is out there. So it's a 12-day race across Fiji. And it stopped in 2002. And then in 2019, Bear Grylls, the adventure guy that everybody knows, he brought it back as a TV show. So he was casting people, and we got casted because I was the youngest adventure racer ever. So we got to go to Fiji and race for 12 days across Fiji. And it was, again, filmed on a TV show. So that was basically the pinnacle of everybody in adventure racing. That was like the pinnacle for our sport. It was always about getting to the stage where you could do Eco Challenge. And at 18 years old, I finished the race and set the record for the youngest to ever do the Eco Challenge. And after that, I kind of felt empty. I was like, man, my entire life has been doing these longer and longer adventure races, from expedition length to world championships to Eco Challenge. And now that I finished Eco Challenge, what else is there? There isn't anything tougher than Eco Challenge in that realm. So that's when I started branching off into like ultra running. I basically, on a whim, I was like, hey, running 100 miles sounds fun. I don't want to wait a few years to do it. Let me just go do it like next month. So with no training, I went and did a 100 miler. It was the worst experience. I was in so much pain. My legs hurt so bad that I was like, oh man, this is like great.
We've got to slow down and talk about this, right? I've done a couple of ultras, and this year I went out on a limb and literally signed up for my first 100 miler. I signed up for it last week, and I've only got 3 months to train for this thing, which, for most people it's like, oh, it's 3 months. But for most people that actually run hundreds, like that's nothing, right? That's like they're training way farther out, right? I just wasn't really planning, I guess, on doing 100. And when I was planning on doing it, I was thinking it'd be in the second half of the year. And as I got looking at races, I just wasn't able to find what I was looking for, an opportunity in the later half of the year, unless there was like one in November, and that was not one that just appealed to me, I guess. So now I'm really interested to just dig in on this. So you tell me about anything leading up to your first 100, what that experience was like. Just slow down a little and go back to this first 100. Yeah. And how old were you at this point?
I was 19, I think.
Okay. So 19, you sign up for a 100 miler. How much time do you have to train, or did you do any training?
So I finished Eco Challenge in September, end of September. And I basically was like, I just want to recover. I don't want to do anything. So I didn't put on any running shoes for until the Christmas time, basically. And then I found this 100 miler that was like 3 weeks later. I'm like, oh, I think I'm recovered enough. I should go try it out. I think it's just like blind optimism I have for everything I do is like, I've done Eco Challenge. I've done all these long adventure races. I know how to, I've run hundreds of miles in these adventure races, but it's kind of broken up into like 50-mile chunks. And I was like, I think I can do this 100. So I went into it, I signed up, and I was like, I don't need to do training. Let me just recover and just show up to the start line without doing any training. And that's what I did.
Oh my goodness.
I showed up, and
oh my goodness.
It was again super painful. It was, the first 50 miles went great, and then it was like my legs started hurting in a way they've never felt before, like cramping up and like really tight knees and all this stuff where like adventure racing, the cool thing about it is, you'll run like 50 miles and some sections are 100 miles, but we're mainly hiking. And then you switch to a bike and you can rest on a bike, and then you switch to a paddle, and then you switch back to the bike, and you kind of switch disciplines, where I found out really quick that ultra running, that pounding, just one sport, makes everything so much harder for me. So it was a pretty miserable experience, and I cried, and my dad was there, and he was like, he's always there for all my adventures, but this one he was just pacing me for like 20 miles, and he's like, what's wrong with you, Hunter? You're like a completely different person. You're like crying and complaining, and it was just a whole miserable experience. But from that, it was like, I realized like I grow as a person when I'm put outside my comfort zone. In adventure racing, I got so comfortable. Even during Eco Challenge and all these tough races, I felt comfortable. In ultra running, 100 miles was like way outside my comfort zone, and I learned so much about myself, and that's what hooked me. Yeah.
So on that race, what race was it?
It was a long haul 100 down in Florida.
Okay. That's interesting.
So completely flat and easy of a course, and it killed me.
Is it? Is it? Okay. That's kind of what I was actually wondering. But Like, was there a time cutoff or anything like that? Or were you well under the time cutoff, or did that become a factor?
The cutoff was 32 hours. And I finished in like 30 hours, I think.
Okay.
So I think that what became a factor where I was like, oh, I know I can knock out 100 miles, but 32 hours at the time felt so hard, and like, man, run that fast. So
yeah, that's wild. So you do this, you realize, just how much more difficult it is, or it's different sport, different elements, different struggles, right? Are you much of like a backpacker at all, or is it mainly just sticking to ultra running and these adventures?
Yeah, I consider myself a backpacker for years, because adventure racing, that's really what we're doing. Like, some of these big efforts, your 100 miles completely unsupported. So we have to carry like 30-pound, 40-pound backpacks sometimes. And then especially if we talk about the last TV show I was on, that was, we'll talk about that later. But
is that, yeah. So you do this 100 miler. I consider myself a backpacker. Okay. You do this 100 miler, and you also start to get into like expeditions, right?
Yeah.
At what age, or when was your first expedition?
So I did that 100 miler. And I jumped full force into like crazy FKTs and stuff, because it was like, okay, I did 100 miles. What's next? Instead of what most people think is like, okay, I did 100 miles. I barely survived. Let me just try to keep perfecting a 100 miler. I was like, oh, next one is 300 miles. So I ran a 300 mile ultra marathon and almost died from that too. But
you ran a 300 mile ultra marathon?
Yeah.
Oh, so my goodness.
Like a year later, I think I tackled the 300 mile Bent Mackay fastest known time, which is like one of the gnarliest trails in the country. It goes from the Smoky Mountains all the way down to Springer Mountain, Georgia, and has like 72,000 feet of elevation gain. It's just so gnarly. Wow. And I went into that with almost no training. It was just, again, my training has always been like, I do these big adventures and it trains me for the next thing. It's just constantly training from a race to race to race. So I went into that, was like, oh, I'm just going to go wing it. And I ended up finishing it, but it was, again, a really tough experience.
And did you set the fastest known time then?
We did, yeah.
Okay.
Set the fastest known time for that. And again, that was something where I went into it so blind. It was like, again, blind optimism. It was like, that's what gets me to the start line of these things. Like, you get so like scared and intimidated by the big goal, and you won't even do it. So me, it's like, I'd rather go into it blindly optimist and then show up to the start line. And then, yeah, if the race is horrible, at least I started that. That's more of a success for me than me worrying about it and over planning and stuff. So yeah, I showed up at 300 miles and went into it. Was like, oh, I think I'm going to knock this out in like 4.5 days or so. And it took me 6 days, and I beat the record by only like 5 hours or something like that, but got it done.
I think that's really interesting though, right? Like, you're very optimistic. I think on your Instagram account, like on the bio, it says like every day you're alive is the best day ever. Like, obviously that's like a lot of optimism. You've also built confidence through these races that you've done. And then I'm so like, I guess what I'm wondering is, it seems like you've built a very tough mental strength, right? And there's a whole thing around that, right? Like, there's people that for sure are stronger physically than they are mentally, I'm sure. But there's others that can tap into a different place, and just get to a different, I'm in physical pain or I'm in this, but I can keep going. In fact, one of, just the absolute legend, Courtney Dauwalter, I think that's like her superpower is her optimism, right? Like, she goes and does things like she's just an incredibly gifted athlete, but at the same time, is it her athleticism, or is it her like crazy optimism that she seems to have and be able to like go into the most painful situations and just stay optimistic? For you, is like, you think about that for yourself, like, how much do you feel like training and athleticism is a part of your achievements versus something else?
Yeah, I think I always say I'm nothing special, like physically. I don't think I'm the fittest person ever. You go on Instagram, there's way fitter guys than me, but I feel like the experience I've had, and again, I rely so much on my mental strength, like doing hundreds of adventure races and all these ultra marathons builds up that mental fortitude that like anything that's thrown at me, I think I can make it through or survive. And I think that's what I rely on in all these things. Even if I show up at the start line, not trained fully and not feeling fresh, I know I can rely on my mindset to push me through that. And I've always wanted to be that athlete that could really be thrown into any situation and make it through. It's not going to be the fastest, it's not going to be the prettiest, but I'll make it through it. And that's why it's like, I look at other athletes, some top runners that are like so gifted physically, I feel like, I know mentally they're strong too, but something goes wrong with them in an ultra or something. Like their crew forgets to give them a gel. And it's like all of a sudden the whole race is destroyed and they're crying and they quit the race. And it was like, I never wanted to be that athlete. I wanted to be the athlete where I could show up for 50 miles and my crew misses me all 5 crew stops and I'll be perfectly fine. I'm going to make it through. I'll somehow just rely on my mental strength to go through. So
yeah. Have you ever DNF'd something?
I have. There's been, I think like 2 races I DNF'd. One was, I should have DNF'd about 10 hours earlier. But again, there's a tricky thing with the mindset. There's so many layers to building up your mental strength. Is like, I got into this doing all these crazy races. I was like, I'm never going to quit a race. That's like, there's never a reason I should quit a race unless I'm going to die. And it's like, you listen to David Goggins and that's what he said, right? But then it could be very dangerous when you could actually die. So like I had a adventure race where I was whitewater rafting and my boat flipped and I got a concussion and dislocated my arm. And a thought of quitting never came across my mind. I hopped out of the boat, got on my bike and instantly kept racing. And my teammates like, Hunter, we should stop. Your arm's like literally dislocated. You have a concussion. You can't see. I'm like, no, I'm not quitting. Pushing through the pain. And I went for like another 8 hours, throwing up, blacking out, like shitting myself, everything. And eventually the medics pulled me from the race. But looking back on the experience, I thought that was me being tough. But that was me being weak. That was the hardest thing for me to do in that situation was to stop. And I wasn't willing to stop. The easy thing for me to do in races is to just keep pushing through. But there comes a point where you need to realize it's like, you can't push through everything. So I DNF'd that race and I DNF'd another race actually last year. I was coming off this big 50 state summit world record attempt. And like the next 2 weeks later, I was like, oh, I feel in great shape. Let me go try a 100-miler and got super bad altitude sickness and had to pull out of the race. But so no matter how strong mentally you are, comes a limit where it's not worth dying for.
Right. Yeah, I think that that still just blows me away though, that you can, in a lot of ways, show up to some of these races in the past, just cold turkey, just out of the blue and finish them. I think it says a lot of what the human body can do. And some people like that just isn't possible, probably like physically or the base level of fitness they have, like that just would not be possible. But for other people, it is. And you're proving that, right? It's that it really can be mind over matter in a lot of these situations. I also think that your approach of like, I'm here to finish probably has helped you in a lot of ways of like not going out too fast, too strong, and like creating massive issues that just come back and just destroy you later in the race, right?
Yeah.
But that's actually what made me decide that I thought I could do a 100-miler is I was pacing a guy by the name of Jeff Peltier in the Moab 240, and I was like, man, I can hold this pace for 100 miles, but I was like, but I've never gone this slow in a race, you know what I mean? And so just got like the wheels turned, like, okay, maybe if I trained well enough and I, slowed myself down enough in the beginning and some of those things, then maybe this would be a reality. So we'll see. We'll see if it becomes a reality.
It is a very interesting thing pacing somebody for these things because it's like, again, I had that thought too. You're running with a friend and you're like, man, I think I can hold this for X many hours or X many miles. And it's like, I should go sign up for my own race. And I made that mistake where I was pacing a friend for his FKT, and I paced him for 150 miles consistently. And I was like, man, I feel like in great shape. I'm going to go after this record next year. He told me and it was like a completely different experience when you're the one in the fight.
Yeah.
When you're pacing somebody, it's something about like your mindset is so focused on them and taking care of them that you don't realize, oh man, I'm actually really sore right now, but I can't complain because I got to support them.
They're worse than I am. Yeah.
But when you're the one in the fight and you're start suffering at like mile 50 and your legs hurt, you can complain about that. And it kind of like makes it way harder. But I think you should have the confidence going into your 100-miler that you could do it. Your body's capable of it. Like I often do the mindset of like, okay, you signed for a 100-miler. Tell yourself, do you think you could do 200 miles? When you get to that finish line, if somebody told you, put a gun against your head and it's like, all right, you got to go run another 100 miles. Could you do that? And most of the time for me, it's like, yeah, I could. So it's like going into the race, I think with confidence that you could do double the distance if you had to.
Yeah. No, that's so true though about pacing, because I remember like when I was pacing him, someone got to the end of like, how do you feel? How do you, and I literally like stopped and thought, I'm like, I don't know. I haven't thought once about how I feel. I just know that I don't feel as bad as him right now. You know, he's got an extra this many miles on me. And like, I've just only been in the headspace of like, you know, trying to move him along as efficiently as I can. And man, this climb is tough. I wonder how he's feeling. You know, it's just like I never stopped to think about how I was really feeling. But like I remember I was like being very conscious to like keep fluids and nutrition and stuff in me so I didn't become a problem. But like I wasn't in the headspace of worrying about myself. And so that's interesting. That'll be interesting to see how that changes on this 100 miler. But
I'm curious how we can implement that into our own races. Like, do we get a pacer that's like way out of shape and we have to take care of them the whole time? I think that might actually work.
Just an imaginary friend. I'll try. I'll go to that headspace when it's middle of the night and I'm hallucinating or something, you know?
Exactly.
So I wanted to come back though, because you've also done expeditions. So talk to me a little bit about what expeditions you've done and just the differences. Like what is it like to do an expedition style race? You know, what, I don't know. Like, I guess I would imagine that most people listening to this just are not familiar with them. So would love to hear what that's like going into those and just being out there.
No, I've done a bunch of expeditions. That's where I find the most enjoyment, because it's not like a set race and it's not something that you're signing up for. Of like, there's a lot of unknown of like, is this even possible? So that like excites me. So the two biggest expeditions I've done the past 2 years was in 8 teams of 2. I teamed up with my dad.
You cut out there for a second.
Yep.
So I might have to
internet connection unstable.
But no, you started with. I'm gonna lose it now. I don't know. Back about 30 seconds, if you would.
Yeah. So in 2020, I got casted for a TV show called Race to Survive Alaska, and it's on Peacock. You can go watch it. But the premise was 8 teams of 2 got dropped off in Alaska with no food, limited gear, and we had to race hundreds of miles across Alaska for like 40 days. So like,
quick, did they give you bear spray or a weapon?
They gave us bear spray, but when you're dealing with big grizzlies, you kind of want a shotgun with you. But
Okay.
So I teamed up with my dad. I brought him out of retirement. He was like done with adventure racing. But I was like, Dad, this great opportunity. Let's go do this TV show together. It would be so much fun. It was a lot of fun, but a lot of suffering. But it was basically the most extreme expedition I could ever think of, where it's basically like the show alone, but moving. Yeah. So again, we were there with no real food. They gave us some like canned clams and canned mussels. And the premise was, again, we had to race hundreds of miles across the state and like hunt for our own food, forage, fish, like no tents, nothing. It was just like, we had a little tarp we had to share for 40 something days.
Go through some of the gear. Like what gear did they give you for this?
So they gave us a gear list. It was like 100 items you could just choose from, but they didn't tell you exactly what. So this is when I discovered Ultralight backpacking. This is when I came across your company. But I basically was like, what's the best ultralight gear possible? And researched it all. And every little ounce I measured on little measuring scales and everything. I went full in ultralight backpacking. And I was like, this is what's going to make or break this race. If we're hauling around 50, 60 pound packs, we're going to break our knees and like drop out of this race. So I was adamant on we have to get the lightest packs possible. But at the same time, the mandatory gear requires like axes and these big pots and like all this stuff, like bows and fishing rods, all this stuff that's really heavy. So everything else had to be ultralight. So I had really good backpacks, tarps. We had 1 tarp per team. And it wasn't like you could have duplicates of everything. You couldn't have like 2 tarps. You couldn't have a tent. You couldn't have a stove, because they wanted to make it survival based. The only real luxury item was that 1 tarp that we could sleep underneath every night. But everything else, we had to make fires. You couldn't use a lighter. You can't use anything. It was just a ferro rod. But the whole premise of the show was, it was funny. We showed up the start line, and my pack weight, I think, weighed like 25 pounds, which is quite heavy and ultralight standard. But when you have a big pod and axis and fishing rods, all this stuff, we were so ultralight. Like everybody else was 40, 50, 60 pound packs. One of the teams had 70 pounds.
No.
70-pound pack. Like, we're not like hiking along a nice paved path or anything. Like, we didn't step foot on a single trail or road for 40 days. It was all bushwhacking through the
40
thickest,
days?
40 days. The thickest Alaskan jungle ever. And these people have 70-pound packs hopping over logs. I'm like, I can't even imagine. It was hard enough for 25-pound packs.
What part of Alaska did they drop you in?
All different parts. So we started in the Ketchikan, which is the southeast corner. It's basically like a rainforest. And they took us to Kodiak Island, which we're already freaked out by grizzlies. We're seeing grizzlies every day. Yeah,
let's just take you to the island totally infested by the biggest grizzly bears in the world. Okay.
Yeah. And here's one little bear spray. Here you go. And the funny thing is, so they gave us no food except these like emergency rations. Like every week they would give us like 500 calories to live off of for a whole week.
No way.
And it was just in case we didn't catch any fish or anything, but they would give us like canned clams with like the smelliest, greasiest oil. So like you open this up and now all your gear is covered in this like bear attractants.
My gosh.
Yes, it was crazy.
Clearly the guy thinking of that was not in the field.
Yeah, it was funny. So then we went to Kodiak Island, the most densely populated bear island in the entire world, I think. It's like one grizzly per square mile. So it's super scary.
They're known to be the biggest grizzlies in the world. They're coastal brown bears, right? They're huge bears. Okay.
And then we finish on Cordova, which is on the mainland with like the typical Alaska. When you think of Alaska, you think these big mountains, but like Alaska is so diverse. You have rainforest. Kodiak Island felt like Hawaii to me. It was so beautiful. And then like Cordova was the jagged glacier peaks and everything. So it was a wide variety of everything.
Okay. So in this, you're trying to travel destination to destination. You got a paper map, compass, this gear. What are you mainly eating?
So again, they gave us these emergency rations, which were not good, not many calories. So you couldn't live off that. So you had to be basically the whole time we're like foraging for stuff while we're racing. We're nonstop like looking for mushrooms and blueberries and like cutting tree bushes and like carrying these blueberry trees and like just eating blueberries the whole time. All these different things. And like fishing was a big thing. We caught like maybe 20 fish, all different types. No salmon, unfortunately. Like we're in Alaska. You think there's going to be these big salmon. We got these little like rockfish. A bunch of, we dug for clams and mussels. But over that 40 days, I lost 25 pounds and my dad lost 35 pounds.
Goodness.
So it's like you're
40 days.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
And I'm a pretty skinny guy to lose that much weight. So I was like fragile. My dad looked like Tom Hanks from Castaway. It was hilarious. But it was this crazy thing about this expedition was not only was the mileage crazy and like the terrain we were going through, but we were also starving. So like you're so weak. I'm used to like hiking the Appalachian Trail, nonstop eating backpacker meals and all this stuff. But like this, we're like bushwhacking, so weak, no muscle. It was like crazy expedition.
It's crazy hard mentally too, right? Because like it's one thing to just be able to plug into a trail and just go, right?
Yeah.
It's another thing when you are trying to navigate, you're trying to use mental energy, which your brain like will start to shut off, right? It starts to try to limit resources and calorie burn any way it can, your body. And then, but then you get to a spot where it's like, there's just no easy way to cross this. And I've got nothing in the gas tank. It's not like you can just plug onto a trail, turn your brain off and just cruise, right? That sounds incredibly challenging to me.
Yeah.
What do you feel like Oh, go ahead.
There's so many layers to that. Like that show was, yes, there was no set trail or anything. So we're map and compassing every single step. We're nonstop looking. And then the aspect that we're starving and that we're carrying these big backpacks. But there's also, this is a TV show. So there's camera crews filming us this whole time, interviewing us. How are you guys feeling? And we're just like dying here. Like, we're feeling great. Yeah, good job. Trying to like be entertaining for TV while suffering. And then also for 40 days, we had no connection to outside world. So we had no phones, no satellite devices. We couldn't even like text my mom, be like, Mom, I'm really struggling right now. I'm in the tent, like starving and suffering all alone. So there's so many aspects to that where it's hard to compare that expedition to anything else I've ever done.
What was the biggest thing you learned from that 40 days?
Yeah. The biggest thing was looking at all the other competitors on the show. So this was a competition. We were fighting for $500,000. So like everybody's competitive, but
which I just got to say this because we just interviewed another guy that did two guys that did the amazing race and that's competing for $1 million. And like, it's such a time commitment, even $500,000. That's not enough money, man. That's not enough money. Like, oh my gosh. Anyways, go on. Sorry.
And that's a perfect transition because that's what like a lot of the competitors on the show were saying. It was like, this is not worth it. I could be back at home making not as much money, but making good money and not starving, not suffering. But in that moment, I realized my dad and I we would be paying $500,000 for this experience. And it's like, we might be messed up for this, but this is what we love. And this is what we do back at home. Like if somebody told me to put on a backpack and go hike across the Appalachian Mountains with no food or anything, I would go do that. That sounds fun. So it's like from that moment, we're looking around, it's like everybody was like complaining and suffering. And it was super tough, toughest thing ever. And I had low moments too, but I was just so grateful to be there. And at the end of the day, I was so grateful to be alive that like halfway through this thing, I would wake up completely starving, hurting so bad from the day before, but I was like crying because I was so happy to be alive. And that's where my bio came from. It was like every day alive is the best day ever, where I would wake up, even though I had no food, it was completely raining, I was starving, I was crying because I was so happy to be breathing. So I got to a point in that show where it was like, from that moment, it's like every single day after this, no matter how bad the day is, no matter how many things go wrong, I could still be happy that I'm still breathing. So that was my biggest takeaway from that entire show.
I'm gonna have to go watch this show. It sounds right up my alley. Because like the idea of like this, like Alone, like people always ask me, "Have you seen Alone? Have you seen Alone?" Like, yeah, I've watched a few episodes, but like it never pulled me in. But this would be, I think, it sounds really interesting to me. There's so much more dynamic, I feel like, going on there. Yeah. Would you say that this was harder than Eco Challenge?
Oh yeah, this was way tougher than Eco Challenge. It was a different tough. Eco Challenge was like physically all out for 12 days. Yeah. And I'm only sleeping for like 1 hour a night, where this was a completely different like mental thing. It wasn't as physically demanding in the sense of like my legs weren't super tired every night because we're not doing big mileage and we're only moving for X many hours a day, but it was just mentally being 40, 50 days off the grid, starving, no comfort items, no connection to the outside world. That was really tough. It was by far the toughest.
Was there any pieces of gear, anything that stuck out to you in that as being just like, this was the piece of gear, this saved my life, or this?
I think, there's so many great pieces of gear. Again, I went through so much and I got to partner with a lot of great brands that gave me a lot of the gear. But one of the underrated pieces of gear that I had was there was no tents allowed on this show. They were really adamant about that. Only a tarp. You can do anything else but a tarp. But I was like, we're going to Alaska. Alaska is known for like really bad mosquitoes. Yeah. So if we're sleeping on this tarp, my dad and I, we're going to be swarmed by mosquitoes. And wearing a bug net is one thing, but when the bug net's against your face, they can sting right through it. So I was like, what can we do about this? So I found this like bug tarp thingy, this big bug tarp. So I had my main tarp and I had this bug draperage over it, and it protected us completely from mosquitoes. And like it made all the other teams jealous because they're waking up with all these mosquito bites on their face, and we're like in there perfectly clean in this Taj Mahal, it was called.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I was thinking like fishing pole or something like that, but bugs are so bad in Alaska. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. So I for sure am going to have to go check that out you said it was on Peacock, right?
Yep.
Okay. Man, I didn't even know. So at any point, did you ever get into like actually dialing in? Cause you've done some FKTs now and you've done some other things now. And I imagine it's just kind of getting more competitive, or maybe you're getting more competitive with things. So at any point, did you start to really focus on training or nutrition or hydration or anything like that?
Yeah, basically, just this past year.
Okay.
2023 was the first year that I actually like took training seriously, and I was like, okay, I'm already a top ranked event racer. I'm doing really good in these ultras and FKTs. I needed to start taking this more serious instead of just like relying fully on the mindset. I feel like I built up my mindset enough that like now I can start dialing in the other things. Where talking about Courtney, a lot of people look at Courtney and all these top athletes, and they're so fixated on the little 1% improvements they can make. Like, oh, what's the shoes? All right, what's the running shorts they use? What's the vest? And it's like, gear is important and all those things are important to make you a better athlete, but those are like the 1 to 10% improvements. People neglect that like 80% of it, 90% of it is just your mindset. People don't want to improve that. That's too hard. They look for the easy fixes. So I finally got to the point I was like, okay, I got the mindset. I feel like now I need to work on the fitness, the training part, and then the gear and everything. So that's why last year, I started really fine tuning the gear. But yeah, basically this past year, I've been doing focusing on the training. And that's why I basically went into this, we could talk about it, but the 50 states world record attempt, really highly trained and everything. And we were able to knock that out.
So leading up to that, what does your training look like? What do you like to focus on?
It's not super structured because again, the sport I do, like I'm not just ultra runner. I'm not just adventure race. I'm not just mountain biker. Like I do all those different sports at a top level, hopefully. And it's like my training is again doing these big efforts back to back. Because again, my adventures change all the time. Where I just finished a 1,100-mile run across Florida. I was running 2 marathons every single day. So that type of training is way different from even a 100-miler that I'm trying to run fast. That's different from adventure racing national championships. That's all out sprint for 24 hours. So I try to keep it as flexible as possible. But if I can get in a few big workouts like every other week, I'm happy with that. And then just in between, a lot of my training isn't that long. Like it's sub 1 hour runs, like really fast interval workouts. I realize I have the fitness, I have the endurance to go on forever. But to get the biggest gains for me is to do these really short, fast workouts, which is counterintuitive for an endurance athlete. You would think, oh, just spend a lot of time on your feet. But it's me, like I'm in the gym a lot doing upper body workouts. I'm doing hill repeats. I'm doing intervals. I'm trying to do like a lot of high heart rate stuff with some big efforts every other week or so.
Yeah. Do you stay like do you ride your mountain bike consistently just for fun or things like that you're not considering working out or training?
Yeah, everything's fun for me. Like training wise, I don't stick to a really structured, I have a coach and everything, but like if I go off the plan like 50% of the time, because it's like, oh, I want to go just ride my bike for fun. My friend invited me out to go ride a bike. I'm not going to say no to that. Like, yeah, because again, I rely on a lot of my mindset to perform at a top level instead of, hey, I need to be super structured in my training. Because I see like, I get to a point where I was like, if I want to be a professional athlete, I basically need to be dormant for an entire year. I need to be in one location, not doing any adventures. I need to be training every single day, exactly what my coach tells me to do. And that just wasn't the life I wanted to have. Like, I want to be able to go hike the Appalachian Trail whenever I want. I want to go caving. I want to go mountain biking. And I've built my life around adventures. And if I was fully focused on training to be the best athlete ever, I think I would be pretty depressed.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was just considering the fact that like if you're doing, when you are working out, if you're doing like interval training, hill repeats and stuff like that, that would give you really good bang for your buck if you're also being active just in your everyday life, doing like the lower heart rate, lower intensity, but you're still getting a lot of time in that, right? So that's still like solid training. Okay, I go do my sprint workouts or whatever, and then I come back and I'm just, still mountain biking every other day just for fun. It's not a workout, it's just fun, but it's like you're getting that time, you're getting that. So I can see how that's really effective. What about for like nutrition? So you mentioned briefly about was it you say 1,100 miles across Florida? What are you typically doing for nutrition? Do you just have a gut of steel, or do you dial that stuff in too?
I used to just eat whatever I want. So adventure racing, again, it's all about.
You kind of remind me of an interviewee that we've had that set the PCT FKT, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I eat 12,000 calories a day, 3,000 calories in gummies, 3,000 calories in bars, 3,000 calories in nuts, 3,000." It's just like the most random stuff all the time. But it was like he literally ate 3,000 calories a day of just fruit snacks and gummy bears and stuff like that. So, and I feel like this is like I'm having the same feeling of what you're about to say, but we'll see.
Oh, I'll throw a little twist on it, but because it really depends on the adventure. Like whatever you're doing, it needs to be tailored. If I'm doing like adventure race national championship, where it's like an all-out 24-hour sprint race, basically, I need to be super dialed with my food. I need to have everything laid out. I need to be eating 250 calories an hour. I'm very scientific about that. But when it comes to like something like the 1,100-mile Florida Trail FKT I just did, I'm like burning so many calories. I'm eating 12,000 calories every single day. And it's like, you can't eat 12,000 calories of healthy stuff because you're eating a salad that's like 300 calories. I need to be eating like donut smoothies that are like 2,000 calories in one sip. So,
I think I work out to eat, honestly, because that sounds delicious.
So in adventure racing, I started out as a kid, like doing these races where we would come across gas stations. And if you're like a super dialed scientific athlete, you come to a gas station, there's nothing there you could eat without your stomach going south. But I adapted my body to like, I can go to a gas station and go get hot dogs off the rollers. I could go get milkshake. I could go get ice cream. I could go get the expired little tacos at the stand. Like I could eat anything and still keep going. So I became adaptive with that. But once I started taking ultra running a little bit more serious, I was like, okay, I need to be somewhat dialed. I could still play around a little bit and eat pizza and stuff, but I need to have some sort of a plan.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So in those one races though, you're aiming 250 calories an hour, getting pretty scientific. But so let's jump back for just a second to your summiting the highest peaks in the lower 48 in every state.
Oh,
go ahead. Yeah, what was that like?
We were going after the all 50 states highest mountains in record time. So the fastest to climb every single peak up and down. The record was 43 days. So that was what we were trying to beat. So it was funny. I got invited to that project a month before. I had zero mountaineering experience. Like I'm this crazy endurance athlete and adventure racer and ultra runner, but I had no mountaineering experience. But my adventure racing friend that used to adventure race back in the day, he went off to become this world-class mountaineer, climbed Everest and 7 summits and everything. And a month before, he was like, "Hey, Hunter, I love what you're doing on social media. You want to come film this thing for us?" I'm like, I have no experience. He's like, "Oh, no, I know you're mentally tough. You'll figure it out." So I'm like, okay. So the first mountain I go to was Denali. Like,
oh my gosh,
one of the deadliest mountain, the scariest mountain or whatever in the entire world, people say. I was like, okay, this is gonna be my first experience. So I show up and I'm like, not only climbing these mountains with them and trying to help them set this record, but I'm also carrying all this camera gear and I'm filming this whole thing for them. So it was basically thrown right in the deep end and had to learn really quick. But I think that was me building up my mindset and being really strong of a mental athlete that I could adapt to these situations. Well, even though I had no clue what was going on, I could figure it out. And I didn't put anybody's life on the line. I didn't risk my life, but I figured it out and I ended up doing. So there was 3 climbers on this team and only one of them ended up setting the record. And I was coming in as a filmer and I was all 50 states with them. I climbed all the mountains. I didn't summit all of them because I was prioritizing filming. I think I summited 45 of them, but it was like every single day we're knocking out like 3 to 5 mountains sometimes. Just you basically, we did Denali, summited that mountain, flew straight to Hawaii the same day, climbed Hawaii's highest mountain, flew to Chicago, picked up an RV, and it was 42 days of nonstop driving. We would be shooken awake and hop out, instantly have to go climb a mountain, come right back down, pass out for 3 hours, get shooken awake again and go climb another mountain. It's like we're doing these really sketchy mountains like Montana's Peak, followed by Mount Rainier the next day, followed by Hood 3 hours later, followed by Mount Whitney, like all these crazy things. And I'm like there with no experience, just like tagging along for the ride and hoping I can keep up.
Holy cow. First off, I got to go back to Denali. How fast did you climb Denali then?
Yeah, so the plan was we were very optimistic going into this. I came in very
I wouldn't
last minute.
expect anything different. Yeah.
I know, exactly. Our plan was to go summit the mountain, or go up to like at least like 18,000 feet to go get acclimatized, and then ski all the way back down to base camp. And then the record starts and we sprint up the mountain in 2 days and sprint right back down in 1 day. We try to do that to make the record as fast as possible. Realized that was almost impossible with the small weather window we had. So we ended up going up in 8 days, which is still really fast for Denali. The average summit time is like 21 days. And then we skied right back down and caught a flight the next day. So it was a 9-day on Denali alone.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. The way that you initially pitched that was like a single day. And I was like, that's like the only person I've ever heard of doing that is like Kilian Jornet, right? Like, so that's wild though. Like I mean, Denali would be so cool, but yeah, like it's such a time commitment from everything I've heard and seen and read on it. So
it's so worth it. It's such a great experience. If you have opportunity, go do it. It's unlike anything else out there.
Yeah. I was on a flight coming from Fairbanks to Anchorage, and they like banked this massive jet like around it, and gave like the pilot came on and started being like, hey, look out the window, look at Denali, and it was beautiful. Just so cool. So yeah, it's on my list. It's probably not the highest thing on my list, but it's on my list. It should be, I mean, mainly because it's just such a crazy commitment. But so as you're going through and doing all this, and you're just along for the ride, like what are you learning? What are you thinking?
It was a very interesting project because I got onto it because I fell in love with the mission behind it, where it wasn't like they were just trying to set this record to get their name on the Guinness World Record. The really cool story about it was these were 3 kidney donors that all donated a kidney. And one of them actually donated half of his liver. And they were considered disabled if you donate an organ. And they were doing this to prove that like, just because you donate a kidney doesn't mean your life is over and you're not an athlete anymore. They were doing this to like prove that like you could still perform at a top level and set a world record that's this crazy against fully healthy people. So I fell in love with that mission, that story. And I was like, I just need to come, even though I have no experience. I know I could keep up. I know I could film this and tell this story. And just that being around that, this project was more than just getting my name on a record. But that is like the bottom of my priorities on everything I do now. It's like, even this 1100-mile FKT I just did, like I could care less if my name shows up on a website because it's all about the journey and what we learned from it. And this 50 states thing was just so many things went wrong and so many things went right, but it was just such a great experience overall.
Yeah. Like I'm trying to just think. You've seen so much, you've experienced so much in life, and to me, as I'm kind of looking at a bit of an application here, like so many of the people that are listening, I'm just gonna assume some things here, I guess, but they might not be chasing their dreams as much. They might not be as just like gung ho about it, or maybe they just kind of put them on the back burner. And but like listening to you, I feel like I get inspired to be like, yeah, I'm glad I signed up for that 100-miler. I may not be prepared at all, but like my thought, a real thought that I had with it was like, if I don't do it this year, when am I going to do it? Yep. Right? I may never do it. Right? If I put it, and so that was like a big part of it. Was like, well, I have a shorter window. It's not super ideal, but it's never going to be ideal. I'm going to go for it. Right? But like I think people are going to be feeling that listening to you talk. I think people are going to be feeling this incredible optimism you have, right? Like people aren't losing 25 pounds in 40 days and going, I'm lucky to be here, right? that's not a common way to be able to look at life. But you've been able to do that. I'm curious what you would tell people that maybe aren't living life the way you're living it. This specifically in like these parts of your life that are very admirable, like what do you tell people or how do you inspire people to switch that up for themselves? What's your message to them?
It really comes back to the very first lesson I learned at that 7 years old at that 6-hour adventure race. It was like, I learned the lesson of, yes, I could push off my dreams forever, everybody's telling me, hey, you can't do adventure race. You're too young. You need to wait until you're at least 30 years old to do this. And that's been basically my whole life of like, not just the age part, but about like me going and wanting to do all 50 state summits. Like that's one of the hardest world records to do. And I have no mountaineering experience. Common knowledge would be like, oh, wait 2-3 years, go get experience, go climb smaller mountains, and then go do this thing. But it was like from that first race, I was like, everybody's telling you can't do it. Everybody's wanting you to push off your dreams. Why can't I just do it now? What's the worst that can happen? I go do this 6-hour adventure race and I hate it. At least now I know that dream I don't want to have anymore. So like a lot of people think the grass is always green on the other side, and their entire life they're thinking about, oh, I want to go run the 100-miler, but they never do it. So even if they never do it, that's a bad thing for them, because it's like they'll always be thinking, I wish I could do it. I wish I could. And it's like, what if they go do it and they hate it? But now they could check that off the list. But what if they go do it and they love it? Like I did that adventure race when I was 7 years old and I loved it and I fell in love with it. My entire life has been based around that one decision to go do my dream. So every decision I make in my life, it's always, why can't I do it now? Why do I have to push this off X many years until I get this degree or this training in, whatever? It's like, I just do it now. Don't push off your dreams. What's the worst that can happen? That's how I look at everything.
Yeah. I think it's huge. I actually remember when I was about 20 years old and I was speaking with a mentor of mine, and he said, he was asking, what's your plans? What's your, life plans essentially? I'm like, well, I'm going to go back, I'll get back into school. I'm going to get my degree. I'm going to go work for a big company. I'm going to get lots of experience. And then when I'm like, getting close to 30 years old, I want to start my own business. Like I've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I just thought it was like the most logical, foolproof plan. Like I'll have this experience. I'll probably have some money at that point to be able to invest into a business. And he just looked at me and he just laughed and said, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And I was like, I bet you could have, like the shock that probably would have been on my face, because I thought I was being so intelligent, right? I thought I was being so smart. And so I just like sat there and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by that? Like, I thought, like, what's the better plan? Like, obviously you know something I don't. And he's like, so you're telling me you're going to go to school, or finish school, as I'd already started school. You're probably going to get married. You're probably going to have a kid or two. And then when you have all of this, you're probably going to buy a house, and then when you have all of this debt and all of these responsibilities, that's when you're going to jump ship and take on all this risk and try something, right? And I was like, oh, like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. He's like, try to start a business while you're in college, when you've got nothing to lose. You've got no, and that conversation stuck with me forever, right? Because I went back. I basically started looking for opportunities to start a business. I started doing that stuff. And literally the last semester of school for me, I started Outdoor Vitals, and have been doing that for coming up on 10 years. But it's just so true. Like if you wait for tomorrow, like tomorrow either will never come or everything changes and you'll look back and potentially have those regrets. I don't think there's anything that I've been like, no, I'm going to do it today, I'm not going to put it off, that I look back at and think, I wish I had not done it then or attempted it then, right? It's like, no, even if you fail, you learn. And like you said, like you learn whether you like it or don't like it, or you learn to go try it again and be successful the next time. So I think that's a really powerful message.
Yeah. And I think you touched on it there perfectly. It's like everything for me in my life comes back to gratitude. Again, waking up that morning of that race and just crying that I was so grateful to be alive. And also all those decisions of like, hey, should I start that business? No, let's push it off a few more years. I'm like grateful that I'm waking up and breathing, because tomorrow's not guaranteed. Me pushing off that business idea, whatever, until I'm 30, 40 years old, that's not guaranteed. That's like ignorant for me to say, oh, I'll do that later, because it's basically me being like, oh, tomorrow is guaranteed. I feel like, no, you just got to take every single day. Like this is bonus time. That's why like everything I've done in my life, if something happened to me today and I died, I would still be grateful for everything I did. So everything else from here, every single minute is bonus time for me. That's why I can always be positive through everything. No matter if I'm struggling in a ultra marathon, I'm throwing up and cramping and everything hurts. I'm just like, I could feel this pain. I'm so grateful to be alive. So it's like, again, every decision take you back to like, tomorrow's not guaranteed. today and this moment is guaranteed. So just take every opportunity as you can and go after your dreams now.
Yeah. It's huge. I really appreciate you sharing that and living your life in a way that you're just showcasing that, right? What have we not, what other messages, I guess, do you have for the world? Is there anything that I haven't, touched on? I mean, obviously, like, we could talk for hours about so many different races, so many different things. But do you have any other, missions? What's coming up for you? What's your driving force for continuing down this path you're on?
I think this latest one that I just finished a month ago, the 1,100 mile Florida Trail FKT, I learned a big mission in my life has always been like, oh, I just want to keep pushing myself and doing this next hardest thing and proving what kids can do. And I got to a point in this 1,100 mile run that I was like, yes, that's one thing, to keep improving myself, because every adventure I do, I feel like I come out the other side as a completely different person. And I learn so many lessons and I grow as an athlete, more importantly, as a person. But I think a new mission in my life is to be able to share as many of these lessons as possible. So it's like, I'm not just improving my life, but if anybody wants to listen, I'll write down my thoughts and post them on my Instagram and all these different things to like share what I've learned. Because not everybody has to go run 1,100 miles to learn the lessons that we're talking about right now. Like, that's a great world we live in, that you could go read a book or listen to a podcast. And if you listen to the words people say, like, you can learn these lessons without you having to go suffer for 1,100 miles. So that's kind of like a purpose and mission that I have the rest of my life, is be able to keep pushing myself and learning as much as I can about myself, whether that's me running hundreds of miles, or if I get paralyzed tomorrow and I have to figure out something else, I'll continue try to improve myself and try to share those lessons with others.
Yeah. Yeah. Life's too short to learn from your mistakes alone. So, I think that's really admirable and just, it brings a different purpose to life when you have a purpose bigger than just yourself. Right. Do you know who Ray Zahab is? He's been a previous guest on this show.
No, doesn't ring a bell.
I'd introduce you to him, but he's a big expedition kind of guy, very, very similar to you, but he also has some really cool missions and things that he is a part of. So I'd connect you to. I think that you guys would have a lot in common. But no, I think that's a great place, I guess, to maybe wrap this up. You have an Instagram account that people can go follow. Maybe shout out your Instagram and your YouTube account, if you would, just so that people can get more of this enthusiasm and be inspired more by you, Hunter.
Yeah, Instagram's Hunter Leininger and my YouTube's Hunter Leininger, and I post a variety of content of like sharing my adventures, lessons like this, try to condense them down into a 30-second clip that catches people's attention. And then be warned, there are some funny videos that you probably won't understand about me eating sticks of butter and ranch and stuff, but get in on the joke.
Have you gone through like an identity crisis of like, you were the young kid running all these adventure races and now technically you're an adult, right? Like, has there like been a moment where like, whoa, I'm not the little kid anymore in this. Like I'm getting older now. No,
it has been interesting, the shift of how people talk to me or look at me, because it was like, as a kid, it was always like, oh, you can't do it because you're so young. But now it's like, now that I'm 20 or 22 years old, people are like, oh, you can do this just because you're young. Like, that's the only reason you've been able to do this stuff.
they totally switch it.
Yeah, totally switched.
Yeah. If you were 22, you couldn't, go and cold shoot 100 miles. But if you were my age, so now it's just totally reversed, huh? Oh, that's good, man. That is such... It's so accurate, though, man. That is the world. That is exactly how the world sees life. They always are going to look at the glass half empty. They're always going to look at the reasons why they can't instead of the reasons why they can. And man, I love that. That's so comical to me.
But it doesn't change the way how I look at myself. I still look at myself the same way. And it's like, okay, people can look at and say different things. It's okay. Yeah, I'm happy with who I am and what I've done.
That's so awesome. Any big plans for 2024?
I just finished that Florida trail run, and it was like, I just want to take a month off and not think about anything else. And it's always been my entire life. It's always, what's next? You finish the thing and you're immediately planning the next thing. And I realized from this, it's like, if I truly want to make this mean something, I need to finish it and just take as much time as I can, reflect on it, write down my notes, journal everything, and try to reflect on the experience before I just go hop on the next thing. So I don't really have any big plans right now. I have a list of 100 different adventures that I've piled up from years. And now I'm like, I have the confidence in myself where I can just like, okay, that looks fun. Yeah. Okay. I don't have experience with that, but I can go try it. So the Appalachian Trail FKT's always been out there for me. That's why I got into ultra running in the first place. So within the next year, maybe. So
that one would be freaking competitive, man. Because because it's such a big trail and such a popular trail. That would you do it supported or unsupported?
I would do it supported. So I have 2 friends this year that I'm going out and crewing and pacing for. So I'll be able to help them set the record, hopefully. And then maybe the following year I do it.
I've interviewed a guy who has attempted that, supported as well. And it's brutal, man. It's brutal.
There's something about the supported efforts that are so hard. Like 1,100 miles, I had a support crew that meet me like every 10 miles. And just yes, it's easier in a sense that because you have to carry a little vest and you see people and you sleep in a car, but mentally it's a lot more taxing. I feel like of like always thinking about their crew, thinking, oh, are they going to make it there? So like, I think going into this year, I want to start doing more back to my expedition roots of like more ultra running, but expedition style of like doing some cool self-supported crossing whole countries by myself that like, really, I'm dropping it here, but Iceland, I want to go after the Iceland Traverse record. I think that would be such a cool adventure for like 9 days, completely off the grid with no support, nothing, just hiking across the thing. Make sure your gear is completely dialed, have the best ultralight gear possible, and traverse this country as fast as you possibly can. I think that excites me right now. Yeah,
I got to introduce you to Ray. He's done like the Namibia Desert, he's done. He's done a handful like just like that, like just traversing massive obstacles, usually in the desert for him. But that's awesome. Well, I'm really excited to watch what you end up doing with your time and your energy and your efforts. I'm sure it's going to be such a cool ride to continue to watch that, and just appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all these thoughts. So
thanks so much for the chat, and I love what you guys all are doing. So big fan.
All right, there you have it. Thanks again, Hunter, for coming on the podcast. It was our pleasure to host you, and just love the mindset that you have, the view on life, the positivity you have, and just the attitude of why not instead of, why can't I? I hope that all of us can take that, internalize that a little bit and go after some big adventures. And speaking of that, I'm not sure when this podcast will release exactly, but we do have the 100-mile challenge registration going during the month of March. If you want to, raise your hand and say, why not this year, and go and make a dream hike a reality, join the 100-mile challenge. By joining that 100-mile challenge, yes, there's a fee. It's a DIY challenge, but that fee literally is covered by gear that we give you. We'll give you an altitude sun hoodie, which is like a $50+ value. We'll give you some store credit and some other things so that entire registration fee you'll get in physical products back. But what it helps you do is it helps you make a strong commitment to go and do something, to set a big goal. Inside the 100-mile challenge, we will take the time to really break down how to achieve that goal, how to train, how to prepare, and just how to help you achieve what you guys all want to do. No, you're not going to have to pay thousands of dollars to go on a guided backpacking trip. You can go and do this yourself for a very fractional amount. And I think you guys will really enjoy that. Now, this has grown exponentially over the years. It's something that I really enjoy doing. It's not an actual profit center for us. This is simply something that I'm passionate about with our mission here at Outdoor Vitals to connect people to the vital outdoors. So I really hope that you guys take Hunter's approach. You jump over there, you sign up for the OV 100-mile challenge this year, not next year, not in 2 years, this year. Go make something happen. Now, there is a stacked method to this. So if you for sure can't make a 100-mile trip work this year, you can still do multiple trips to make that happen. And we did increase the trip window. But go set a big goal, make some things happen. I know you guys will never regret attempting this 100-mile challenge. And if you follow it, I know that you'll achieve it. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Make sure you are subscribed. If you have not yet reviewed this podcast, please do so. Share this with your friends and share the 100-mile challenge with your friends as well. And we'll catch you guys on a future episode.